let's talk about maritime compliance. What we all hear about all the compliance requirements. I'm sure you've heard about CMMC. You've heard about you know, Sarbanes-Oxley, all these different audit requirements that are out there for all the different parts of the industries and the world. You have ISO 27001 for information security. You got all the different ISOs. One of the things that's not well known outside of the maritime industry is that maritime actually has a compliance requirement. So they are regulated under the Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002. If you all remember, 2001 was a watershed year for the United States when it came to the terrorist attack on 9/11. But that caused a lot of introspection into the security of the United States. A lot of physical security requirements were put into place. We see that if you ever travel through the airport. You have screening, you have terror checklists, all this that goes on as a result of 9/11. And same thing happened in the maritime industry, where we had an increase of physical security requirements within the maritime realm. So a year later, less than a year later after the attacks, Congress passed the Maritime Transportation Security Act. In there, they used communications, and the intent was in 2002 was really just to make sure that we had secure communications between people that are performing physical security. So in other words, people pick up their little walkie-talkies, their radios, etc. Any data security communication, that was all that Congress was thinking about at the time. Go back, how many years is that now? 22 years. All the problems that we have now with cyber attacks, just kind of getting started, but wasn't something that was a lot of interest to the federal government. So with that, Coast Guard went forward and said, well, we got a problem. How do we address cybersecurity now? It's 2020, 2021, everything that's going on in the world, all the cyber attacks. Coast Guard's got really nothing to stand on to sit there and say, we want to enforce cybersecurity in the maritime industry. Well, they use that one word, communications, as their crutch to start implementing cybersecurity requirements for for organizations that fall under that federally regulated mandate of the Maritime Transportation Security Act. So Coast Guard reached out and told everybody, hey, we're going to release this thing called Navigation and Vessel Inspection Circular, or NAVIC for short. And it provides recommendations for improving cybersecurity within an organization that is regulated. Again, these are recommendations. There's nothing that says it's required because of the one word that exists in the federal act. A few years later, they came out with the Maritime Cybersecurity Assessment and Annex Guide, or MCAG, and that provided a little bit more capability for the assessors to sit there to say, okay, we want to go out and make sure the organizations that we're regulating are meeting certain requirements. Again, what you find in the MCAG is, again, recommendations. There's no requirements, regulatory requirements for them to do anything. The other problem Coast Guard had is they didn't have people that were qualified and to go out to do these cybersecurity assessments. Now, if you're familiar with CMMC, there's been a big push here in the last year or so to get people qualified become CMMC certified professionals and assessors. Well, the Coast Guard's got a similar problem, except for they don't have a program like CMMC. They have to train up their security or their security assessors to go out and not only look at physical security, but also now to go out and look at cybersecurity. And so they just didn't have a clue of what that was. Earlier, when in 2020, I was actually holding classes for the Coast Guard while I was at the Port of Houston, teaching them on some of the things to look for when they're going out and do cyber assessments. They still never really kind of picked it up, and so cybersecurity assessments haven't really become a major thing within the maritime industry. Most recently, NAVIC 0224 came out after the White House put out a letter to everybody in the maritime industry saying we need to improve the cybersecurity for the maritime realm, and gave Coast Guard the authority to go forth and produce a regulatory document that can be used to enforce cybersecurity assessments on the maritime industry. And that Coast Guard document is now titled Cybersecurity in the Marine Industry. It is still in the proposed rules making stage, but once it does become validated and approved, it'll be part of 33 CFR Part 101. The scope of maritime industry under MTSA covers three distinct areas. You have vessels, which is covered under Part 104, facilities, which is under Part 105, and outer continental shelf facilities, which is Part 106. So vessels, we see them. We go, you go to Galveston, you go to, the Houston Ship Channel. You see these ships. You see vessels that may be going up and down intercoastal waterway. They're smaller, but they're pushing barges, tugs, or pullers, pulling barges up and down the intercoastal waterway, going up and down the Mississippi River. Any river or waterway that is navigable that has a vessel that's over a certain tonnage has to meet cybersecurity requirements. Key is these vessels have to be U.S. flagged. There's no requirement for foreign flagged vessels to meet cybersecurity requirements other than those imposed by the International Maritime Organization, also known as IMO. So think about the vessel. If our cars are any indication of how complex a motor vehicle is, multiply that by 1,000, 10,000 times for a ship. You have these super large engines. You have all these pumps within a ship that are controlling everything from water being pumped into the ship to make the ship ride lower, or water being pumped out to make it ride higher. Ballast is a key control function that a ship has, and it's typically controlled via an industrial control system that can be turned on and off. And you have other industrial control systems measuring fuel temperatures or oil temperatures and fuel pressures. So there's a whole slew of things that are on there. Now, with all of those devices that are on there, the control systems, there are typically a measurement system that is being fed back over the internet to a company that's centralized control center to sit there and monitor the effectiveness, the fuel flow, efficiency of these ships. So you have a lot of IoT now on these vessels. So that means they're internet connected. There's shipboard information technology. You'll have computers all over the ship where crew members are actually having to sit down to do their job and actually have to do them on a computer. You have electronic navigation systems that help these ships plan their course and where they're going. In addition to the operational technology that is, comprising of all the industrial control systems. So a problem they have is enforcement of technology related policies. Think about when kids are out, they get out of sight of the parents. Well, sometimes these kids can sit there and start doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. They get into a little bit of trouble. And it's same things. When a ship gets pulled away from port, they don't have somebody that's sitting there constantly looking over them. They don't have a shipboard monitoring system where information security is and operational technology security is being monitored. Things can be done that may not necessarily meet company policy. So the enforcement of those policies can be a little bit tougher when a ship's at sea. And then incident response. If something does occur while the ship is at sea, how do you do an incident response if there's a cyber attack? What if something did get in and shut down the electronic navigation system or impacted the pumps that would cause ballast, water to be brought on and not be able to be pumped back out? And then you have internet connectivity. You have systems now like Starlink where anybody can go out and buy an antenna and subscription to Starlink and just put it up. We've seen that on ships, even in the U.S. Navy, where U.S. Navy personnel have brought Starlink onto board a ship and created an unauthorized connection to the outside world. Now, if that connection is tied into a computer system on a ship, it just provides another method for an attacker to potentially come in. Facilities. Facilities are these land-based areas like the ports, the Port of Houston, Port of Corpus Christi, all of the facilities that are regulated, that are land-based up and down a ship channel or in a coastal environment. They have a lot of the same concerns, cyber concerns that a regular business would have. You have the insider threat, you have unauthorized devices, you got bring your own devices. All these devices that would come in and potentially represent a risk to an organization are present in any of these facilities. Of course, we have internet connectivity because a lot of information is shared out to the world, email, etc. And you have the potential for data theft and manipulation. We have seen cases where even drug traffickers will attempt to break into and have broken into the technology of a port to disguise the movement of drugs through the port. It happened in a port in Europe, Antwerp, Europe, and they, the drug cartel had hired somebody to sit there and make sure that certain containers didn't get inspected or were put in certain locations so that narcotics could be removed from them and then moved out into the general public. And just like we had with the shipboard cybersecurity concerns, you have the same thing on land-based facilities. You have industrial control systems that control everything from cranes to pumps to electricity. You have IoT and IIoT that also exist. For example, one of the things that the ports are looking at is how can they reduce costs for electricity? Well, so we turn off the lights at the end of the day. How do we do that? Well, we connect them to an internet service that allows us to monitor, activity on the port. And then if there's no activity, it turns off lights in that section of the port down to the minimum number of lights just to maintain security. So we have all these types of systems that are connected that are now part of the ports. And OCS stands for Outer Continental Shelf. It's all your oil rigs and wells that are sitting off in the water area, perhaps the Gulf of Mexico, and they have a lot of industrial control systems. It's basically one giant industrial control system facility. You have pumps, you have sensors, all that technology to manage and process the flow of hydrocarbons or other minerals and resources that are coming in from our national waterways. So that connectivity is a vulnerable risk that has some issues with it. You have a lot of the same shipboard information technology and operational technology on board these outer continental shelf facilities, where you have people that are stationed on board. There's typically maybe 10 to 12 people on one of these outer continental shelf facilities that are there 24/7, maybe for 2 weeks at a time, and they're managing and monitoring everything that's going on within the facility. Is so you could see how maybe potentially somebody might get bored and might bring a Starlink device on board and build their own type of network that could present a risk to the organization, especially if it's plugged in to the organizational's network. Again, like ships, because you're out to sea or away from home, enforcement of technology related policies may be hard to do. For example, if you have a industrial control system that has a USB port on it, and a person needs to charge up a mobile device for whatever reason, and they plug it into that industrial control system, for charging, but that the cable they're using is also a data cable. There presents a risk where data could be corrupted, that industrial control system could be impacted, et cetera. And then incident response and internet connectivity, just like with the ships. You're away from your main IT and your information security organization. While you may have connectivity, you still don't have somebody there to sit there and help in the event of a cyber attack.